First of all, thank you for joining us today, taking the time. First question is, can you introduce yourself? What should people know about you?
Yeah, so my name is Jesus Andrade. I'm a former Stockton City Council member. I served on the council from 2017 to 2020. Born and raised here in the city of Stockton, specifically in the South area. I'm a Franklin High alum. Went to all public schools here in Stockton. First in my family to graduate from college, which is a big feat for us coming from an immigrant family and where my parents didn't finish school. So it was quite an accomplishment early in my life. But since college, I've dedicated myself to public service. I've done some political campaigns, some advocacy around marginalized communities, specifically on economic development, healthcare, access to healthcare, education has been sort of my big piece. And currently I am an executive director with the Improve Your Tomorrow, which is a college access program that's focused on helping young men of color get into and through college.
What made you want to run for mayor?
You know, I have unfinished business. When I ran the first time for city council, I ran with the intent of turning the city around. I mean, during the time of the foreclosure that was happening here, I was living in Los Angeles, so there was a big burden for me since then. I call it the burden of leadership. And so it's still burning. It's still very much a burden for me to be a part of the turnaround, because I believe the turnaround is coming. I think the next 10 years will be very important for the city. I think it'll be very important because I think the homelessness situation is finally, there's a level of coordination happening at all levels of government here in the state. And then there's also an opportunity for housing. Right? There's some pretty unique and forward-thinking policies that are being passed at the state level that I think soon it'll trickle down to the local level. And so for me, it's like unfinished business. Homelessness is a big issue. Public safety is a big issue for me as well. And so for me, it matters who's going to be at the helm over the next 4 to 8 years to make sure that we do turn the city around. And again, for me, it's just something that is very personal for me.
And you mentioned some of the issues facing the city right there. We'll dive right into some of them. But for you, what is the top issue?
You know, the top issue, it's counterintuitive. It's economic development. We have had a declining economy here locally. We've had jobs that have come in through warehousing, but overall the economy has sort of been depressed here. So I think that's the top issue, but the issue that's the most popular, that's in everyone's mind, is homelessness, right? And how do we address homelessness? How do we reduce homelessness? How do we help people get off the street? And then the other thing too, that the behind the scenes, well, not behind the scenes, but the secondary issue with homelessness is how do we keep people from becoming unhoused and becoming homeless, which is tied into housing, tied into the job market, tied into the economy, tied into inflation, you name it. And so it's a tricky, chronic issue that I think requires consistency, requires a plan, and requires leadership.
Definitely, and I do have some questions about homelessness. Yeah. First of all, I want to touch on crime too. You know, big issue for a lot of voters. How would you use the somewhat limited authority of the mayor's office to make any changes when it comes to crime here in the city?
Yeah, you know, the thing I think about is my time during the council. In 2018 and 2019, we had some of the most safest years the city has seen pre-recession. Our crime rate went down significantly, and the rate that we look at the most, especially in Stockton, is the homicide rate. And I think we're in the mid-20s during that time. And so one of the things that were the ingredients that I look at in terms of why were we able to be so successful is we almost had a full force in the police department. Right, we're close to 480, which is what we were allotted with Measure A. And so, believe it or not, you know, there's issues not issues, but conversations about whether police do help reduce crime or not. A full force does, but it's not the only solution. The other thing that we did during that time is we had a well-run Office of Violence Prevention. We were following the Marshall Plan, and then we also had other alternative programs that were out there to help I won't say perpetrators, but helping young men and others who are victims and perpetrators of crime. Yeah.
And you kind of alluded to there, my next question. Stockton PD is dealing with a staffing shortage, officers stretched thin. In the office of mayor, how would you work with council colleagues, the city manager, and the police union to recruit more officers and also make Stockton PD a department where people want to work for?
Yeah, you know, I'd work with the police department. I mean, obviously I worked with the police department through the chief and our city manager, but I'd be an advocate for our police officers and the police officers union in terms of what's needed to do to achieve both retention and new recruits. You know, it's an issue that's been ongoing. It's impacting a lot of major cities. But I think we can fix that if we're working together and we're really addressing like what is the core issue. And I applaud, members of the council that have done some of this work already in terms of having these conversations and modifying, some of the contracts there. But I think we can still do more, and we need to do more. I think a city our size should have about 660 officers, ideally. But it's become a budget issue, right? It's become a sustainability issue. So for us, if we can get to 2/3 of that, a little over 2/3, I think we can have the city that we want and provide protection, safety, and also really just change the perception of who we are, right? First, internally from residents. Residents need to feel safe internally, and then also change the perception of us not being a safe city outside of our city boundaries.
Switching gears a little bit now to an issue mentioned at the beginning, homelessness, another big concern as well. Yeah. As you're well aware, the city spends millions of dollars each year to try to address that. Yeah. What do you think the city is not doing, or what do you think should be changed?
I think, the thing we have to look at is how do we have, let me step back a little bit. Our law enforcement in the cities are pretty much handcuffed because of a Supreme Court ruling where we can't legally move or remove people from public right-of-ways because we need shelter space. And so one of the things I was thinking about is we've always had a homeless problem here in Stockton. Not always, but we built the shelter in the 80s. So there's been an issue with homelessness since the 80s in Stockton, but 300 beds or so, whatever our shelter space was then, was more than enough. But after the recession, post 2012 is when we started seeing a spike, in homelessness, right? Triple, double, it just ballooned. But our infrastructure and our resources did not keep up with that. We were just caught off guard. And so I think we need to revisit temporary shelters, right? How do we provide resources and money to be able to build more shelter space, whether it's structures like we see down at St. Mary's Dining Hall, or whether it's safe camping grounds. We have to be creative and look at all options, because we need to be able to help our law enforcement and first responders to be able to move folks from the street over to temporary shelter, which is the first thing. And the next thing is permanent housing. And then the next thing is being able to find permanent supportive and then permanent housing. And then the other thing we also need to work with the county as a city, work with the county and the state, is with mental health services. I think it's the other thing. You just can't house a person who's suffering from mental health or substance abuse. They have to get the services as well. And so, like I said, I think the next 10 years are going to be very important for local government when it comes to helping with the issue of homelessness.
And the issue of homelessness, a lot of people consider that quality of life issue. A city survey back in 2023 showed that 70% of people felt an excellent or fair quality of life here in Stockton. That number, 70%, is that okay to you? And if not, how would you like to see that changed? So
70% said they felt it was a good quality of life?
70% felt an excellent or fair quality of life.
Excellent, fair quality of life. I think that's a good number. Obviously, as a mayor, I want to get to 100%. We always want to improve, and that's the goal and that should be the goal as mayor, to improve in each and every category. But I'm actually quite happy at 70%. I didn't know what to expect when you said that answer. When you asked that question. But that just goes to show that there has been efforts from prior administrations, there has been efforts from the city, from business owners to be able to improve the quality of life here, which is tremendous, which is also what keeps people here, is do they feel safe? Do they feel like there's things to do? There's amenities that are perfect for their lifestyle. And so having that 70% is pretty good, but we want to get to 100.
We talked about quite a few issues here, but there are still several more that are facing the city. What would be your kind of short list, your top priorities as mayor?
One of the things I want to do is I want to involve the community more. I think since the recession and since the bankruptcy, we have done away with commissions. We have done away with some departments within the city. One of the things I've thought about when I ran as well is like, how do we build a city for the future? How do we build a city for our youth? How do we make them feel like this is home, like we're investing in them? And so one of the things I want to establish is a youth commission on the council where we're hearing from our youth officers, right? From 13 to 18-year-olds. We're asking them questions and they're giving us advice on some of the policies that we're looking at. I think that's a voice that's missing. The other voice is residents. I believe we should have neighborhood associations. We should have neighborhood councils where local folks in their neighborhoods are involved, they're engaged, and they're telling council members and the mayors like, hey, this is what's going on in my community, or if there's any development, any crime, neighborhood watches are happening through neighborhood councils. because we need to hear that voice again. You know, we don't know everything as council members, and you know, if people say otherwise, I don't know, I believe them. We just don't know everything. We can't see everything. So we need to have more people at the table, and I think it involves having residents at the table and our youth. The other thing I want to work on is tourism. I think we need to increase sales revenue through increasing by investing in our assets. You know, the biggest asset we have is where we're sitting at right now, is our waterfront. There's no Central Valley city that has this beautiful waterfront that we have. Sacramento can say they can rival it, but ours is just different. But it's been sitting there for decades. It's just been decaying. It's been neglected. And I think it's the biggest asset we have. The I-5 bridge has millions of unique drivers that cross that bridge every year. So that's a natural advertising mechanism that we're just leaving there. And so I think developing the waterfront will bring in tourism dollars, sales dollars that we need, because what we have is a revenue problem, right? We're at the highest sales tax rate that you can possibly have in California. People are shopping, people are consuming, there's commerce happening here locally, but our revenues are still down, right? It's not where it should be. And I think bringing in tourism dollars again is what will be helpful. I think the other resource is our airport. I think it's underutilized. I think between San Joaquin County down in Merced, we have about 1.3 million people. And I know a lot of people from the East Bay that come to our airports, fly out to Vegas to use Allegiant. So we have a pretty big, good size enough catch basin to be able to have daily flights out of our airport, which I think will bring in just new commerce and extra dollars. The other thing is a four-year university, but that's sort of, to me, it's a long-term project. It's something that we don't have, but what we do have is a waterfront and an airport that we can build on.
So building on kind of what we already have.
Yes, you start where you're at, right? You start where you're at.
You previously served on city council, so kind of you have some of that experience under your belt. You took some time off after that, like you mentioned in your most recent role. What did you learn from those years on city council, and why do you think it's important for you to stay on the dais?
Yeah, I learned that we can come in with all sorts of ideas as elected officials, and we do, right? We're doing it now, right? We're talking about our ideas, but there's a structure in place. It's been in place for 170-something years, as long as the city's been around. And so what I've learned is that it's not as easy as coming in and just saying, I want this done. And, it's a matter of resources, it's a matter of time, and where the priorities are at. And so what I've learned is that it takes a cohesive council to get things done. We do operate in a city manager council type of system, but I've seen cities be successful in that system. The other thing I've learned too is that the mayor's position, especially in Stockton, has to probably be the most toughest position in Central Valley. And I say this because expectations are out the roof. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of expectations from residents. People know who the mayor are. I'd venture to even survey people across the county from other cities to ask them, like, do you know who the mayor of Stockton is, or have heard of the name? I'd venture to say most would say yes. But the expectations are high, but the reality and limitations of the position are real as well, right? It's not a strong mayor system, but we have the issues that rival the Bay Area cities, that rival Sacramento, Fresno, Southern California, but the position is limited. But what I've learned is that there's ways of being impactful, there's ways of having impact, there's ways of being successful, and it's really around building consensus, right? Building consensus, building coalitions of business groups, civic groups, religious leaders, neighborhood councils, which I want, working with the youth, working with our school districts. And I saw that firsthand for 4 years when I served alongside former Mayor Michael Tubbs. I saw what you can do by having that platform and being a consensus builder. And so, I bring that to the table. I'm a trained organizer. I've worked in policy. I've started a business as well. I didn't mention that. But that's been who I am. It's a coalition builder, and that's what you need. You don't go up there and run the city as mayor, right? You're one of 7 voters, one of 7 votes, and you have to have a consensus, and that's my strength.
Final question: why should people vote for you?
I'm the best candidate. I have to say that, right? No, I think people should vote for me because I have a plan. If you go to my website, thenextmayorstockton.com, you can download it. It's a 20-page plan. You have to have a plan coming in. slogans and taglines sound cool on the campaign trail, but you really have to measure the person's work, right? Their background, what they're saying, how they control themselves, how they talk, and the people they're surrounded with. And I have to say that I probably have, the best experience that's needed for the moment. There's some great candidates that are running, but I think my mix of experience of both professional, personal, is what the city needs. If I'm elected, I'll be the second Latino ever to be elected in a city that's been around for 170 plus years. And so, I also see myself as someone who is a role model too for other young people that look like me, right? That they can also achieve the goal of leading in their city, of turning things around, being the next mayor, council member, supervisor, state legislator, whatever the case may be. So I have a burden for the city, and I feel like I have a great responsibility, and it's a great just care, and it's part of who I am.